Hello and welcome back to VGC with our preview coverage of Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. I'm here with Man About Town, Alex Donaldson. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. It's busy, weirdly busy time. Prepping for Gamescom, right?
Yeah, it's all
Summer
kicking
holidays, so
off.
I've got kids in the house. But yeah.
Uh, See, when this came through, and I was like, "Oh my god, have I fallen asleep and woken up 4 weeks later?" Because we've had access to this game for significantly longer than you typically get for a game like this. Usually,
Yeah.
we're trekking down to Hammersmith to go into Capcom's Monster Hunter room to play a game like this. But
Mm-hmm.
we have access to Dead Rising Deluxe Remastered. We can talk up to Case 3, which, if you know Dead Rising, is actually a
It's first
strange,
day and a half. It's
yeah,
first day and a half
first day and
of
a
being
half.
game clock.
But also, if you know what you're doing, you can very quickly do whatever you want in Dead Rising. So it's kind of hard to limit something like that. Like, the game doesn't particularly gate you. But top line, where are you with the original Dead Rising? You said to me on DM when I asked you about this that you thought it was one of the best ever. So I'd like you to qualify
Oh,
that.
I think I think Capcom is one of the best publishers in video games, and especially in the last 10 years,
Oh
Capcom
yeah,
has been one of the best video game publishers. I think they're probably the best third party on the planet, actually, on balance. And in that pantheon, I think they've got so many. Capcom now is really good, but Capcom with the 360 era, they were just dropping like really experimental, really fascinating games, and most of them were bangers. Even the ones that weren't bangers, like
Lost
Lost
Odyssey.
Planet.
I Lost
I was going to
Planet.
say
Yeah.
that was what I was going to say Lost Odyssey because I've been thinking a lot about Fantation lately, but obviously that's coming out soon. But yeah, stuff like Lost Planet and Bionic Commando and stuff like that were also good. But I think the two that sort of stand out is Dead Rising and Dragon's Dogma. And obviously, Dragon's Dogma, Itsuno sat on it for a while and then came back and did a tremendous sequel that I think, Balatro aside, is probably on balance the best game of the year. And Dead Rising obviously had an interesting history where it went over to the States and they made a quite faithful sequel in Dead Rising 2, and then they diverged more and more with the third one, and the fourth one is a disaster. And so it's pleasing to have them bring it back in house. I do think Dead Rising 2 still fits. Like, Capcom, if you're listening to this, I think the thing you now do is you do exactly this to 2.
Yep.
Because it's interesting. I think I like the vibes of the first game more, but playing the first one through again, having played 2 relatively... Actually, I didn't play 2 relatively recently, but I played Dead Rising 2 off the record recently, which was the expansion thing. The, Gaiden side story, unofficial, a non-canon story bit they did for it. But having played 2 quite recently, you realise how much you miss from 2. You realise that the weapon combining in particular, while it gets a bit silly in the later games, you sort of miss that a little bit, and some of the improvements they made to just the flow of the game in the second game. However, with that said, I do think, much like Dragon's Dogma 1, an acquired taste, but Dead Rising is one of Capcom's best ever games. I think Dead Rising is better than any one of the Resident Evil games, even 4. And yeah, it's a special game, but it is an acquired taste. And I think the thing that I thought playing this remaster, Deluxe Remaster, which is a weird name because it sort of straddles, and we'll get into this, right? But it straddles a zone where it's not quite a remake, but really it's far more than I think any remaster I've seen. Short of maybe like when Nintendo did Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, it's more in that sort of vein. But yeah, when I started playing it, the first half an hour, I was like, oh god, this game is old. But then there's something about the cadence and the tempo and the feel of Dead Rising where it just sucks you in, and quickly the things that made you go ugh and made you feel a little bit iffy at the very, very start of the game very quickly melts away and becomes part of its slightly prickly, slightly difficult texture. It's a lot like Dragon's Dogma in that way. And yeah, I just love it. I think it's fantastic. I think this is, I will come out and say it right off the bat, I think this is the definitive version of the game by a million miles. I think there's some stuff they've done which is going to be controversial. I'm one of those people who is a huge Dead Rising fan, so I think probably I don't know how much you're into it, but I think probably there's lots of small changes that I noticed that might have passed like you by, things like that. Like I'm in a Dead Rising fan Discord for a Dead Rising YouTuber who's only got 9,000 followers or whatever, and I been watching their their chatter and stuff like that. So there's a lot of small changes that I think for the hardcore fans are going to add up. Some are going to be loved, some are not going to be loved. But I think in terms of texturally making this game, it's that element of how do you take a game that is actually quite unfriendly, it was quite unfriendly even by 2006 standards, and how do you sand some of the edges off to make it more amenable for a 2024 audience without losing the texture that made that game what it was. Yeah. And in my opinion, they've pretty much threaded the needle. Now, this isn't what you would make if you were making a Dead Rising 5 or rebooting it or whatever, because you would make it even more in that direction. It's a bit like Dragon's Dogma 2 is so much more friendly than Dragon's Dogma 1. But as a re-expression of the first game, this is like pitch perfect.
So
that's where I'm at. That's a very long answer.
No, that's answers basically all my follow-up questions. You've hit kind of where I'm at with it, where really like the first game ended up getting all the achievements back in the day, but the second game...
Did you get the 7-day survivor thing? I couldn't be fucked with that.
Yeah, I did it. I used to have a lot of time in my hands. I have so many...
Yeah, but 37 hours... Straight, you have to play for no saves.
It killed. No, there was ways to do it where you could like wedge yourself in such a way that you could like turn your TV off and go for a sleep and like go to school and stuff like that.
You can't go to sleep though because in the endless mode your life bar constantly ticks down. So every 30 minutes you have to be eating, otherwise you just die. So you can't even sleep for more than 30 minutes because your life bar constantly is going down in that mode.
I wonder how.
So that is how you do it. Is you would fill your inventory of food and stand somewhere safe, but you would still have to come back and eat every night. So and it was I don't know if it was. I feel like it's definitely like over a day. I don't know if it was quite 36 hours. It must have been long.
It must have been a summer holidays job or something like that. But I remember I played way more of the second game. The second game is I like the second game more than I like the first game.
And the second one isn't that's this is what I was talking about at the start, right? The second game is the game where they made a lot of that stuff a lot more realistic. Yeah. So they dropped the achievements where you had to stay up for an unhealthy amount of time where it might actually cause someone to have heart palpitations in favour of some more standard. So yeah, I got 1,000 Gs in 2 and off the record, and 3 I think. But one, that 7-day survivor always eluded me, although I might give it a go on this because I imagine you can cheese it on PC. In fact, I did get all the achievements in the 2016 PC re-release because there were ways, without using trainers and stuff, but there were ways to sort of allow yourself to have a break doing that. So I did do it on that, but I didn't do it on 360 because it was just too much for me.
And now playing this one, it was weird because I was running through it and I remembered basically the way I would always play it because I played it when they put it back out again a couple of years ago. But my memories of 2 were starting to blend into it. And when I first got to the jewelry shop and you see the gems, you're like, oh, you get a torch, you make the lightsaber. And I'm like, oh yeah, the combo weapons were a thing in the second one. And I really like the combo weapons. And I think there's a bit of a concession in this that the combo weapons were like such a big thing because there are a few weapons in this, and like the supermarket, for example, that are combo weapons in the second one, but are only kind of unique ones in this. And
I think they were there in the original, though. I think there's only I don't know because we can only talk about a certain amount of the game, but just to talk about like key art, for instance, they have a key art where it's Frank with every weapon in the game in a shopping basket, and there's a couple of weapons in there that are new, but they're not technically new because they were all unfinished on the disc in the original game. So yeah, a really good example: cops with guns. So in the original game, they would just hold guns and shamble around with their guns. You will have noticed in the Deluxe Remaster, the cops will sort of shoot off the guns
a massive pain in the
at random and actually sort of aim at you. They're really quite difficult, but that's actually quite interesting because that's something that was in like Tokyo Game Show and E3 builds of Dead Rising on the 360. In fact, I think I played a build at Captivate or Capcom's office or something like that, which shows my age, Christ. But I think I played a build with that in it, and that was absent then from the final game. And there's a lot of that. Like there's stuff like designs of zombies, the clothes that they wear that were not in the original game, that were in pre-release screenshots, that are back in this game. And so it feels like to some degree one of the things they've done is re-added stuff. So re-added weapons, re-added small mechanics and stuff like that. But what I will say about the combo weapons is I like nails through a baseball bat and something silly with a lawnmower. It was gems and a torch to make a lightsaber and stuff where it began to lose me a bit. It's sort of that thing of I have a weird line on how wacky I want Dead Rising to be, and I sort of don't mind the Mega Man arm blaster or a lightsaber as a post game unlock, as they are in Dead Rising 1. I assume they still are in this version, but it was bringing some of that silliness into the main game. And that was sort of one of the things where I felt like by the time we got to Dead Rising 4, they'd actually lost sight of the fact that I think one of the coolest things about Dead Rising is that Frank West is a straight guy in a crazy world, but it's still a relatively realistic world. So it's sort of like that Ghostbusters vibe. Like, I actually think Frank West has big, at least in the first game and in the second game and its related stuff, not so much in 4, but he's got big, like, Dan Aykroyd energy.
Oh, yeah, hugely.
And so I like the silliness, but there's sort of a line. I feel like the first Dead Rising is sort of the... Again, you think about Dead Rising 2, right? I think the idea of what would humanity do if there was a zombie outbreak, we'd end up turning killing zombies into a horrific game show. Makes perfect sense for this universe, what they did in Dead Rising 2. But stuff like the laser swords and stuff is where I'm like a bit like, and that's where like I prefer the tone of the first game a bit more. But I do miss the combo weapons because you do you pick up a lot of stuff that's relatively useless.
Yeah.
You pick up a lot of lead pipes and things, or 2x4 pieces of wood, where all you can really do is knock a zombie over. And I think that's one of those funny things about how much more interactive games have become, where in 2006 it was such a novelty that you could pick up anything. Now, actually, it isn't as impressive. So I think that's just a funny thing about how that sort of ends up.
Yeah, and I think it retains the vibe of the original game, and I wanted to talk about how they're framing it as a deluxe remaster. Where would you fall down on getting something like this, or the effort and kind of perhaps changes that would be required to make something that was more of a remake? Because when this was first announced, I sort of thought that's what they were going for, but it's much closer to a remaster tag than I was kind of expecting.
It's funny, when I heard about this on the grapevine probably 2 years ago, I'd heard that it was a full remake, and obviously that was just incorrect information rattling down the pipe. And then later I heard what it really was. But I actually think, look, you don't need to remake absolutely everything. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Dead Rising is still pretty good by modern standards. I understand the idea of remaking the old Resident Evil games, because actually, from a modern perspective, if you're 16 years old now, if you go back and play Tank Control's Resident Evil 2, you're probably going to struggle to get... The vast majority of people that age are going to struggle to get into it. Dead Rising still feels quite modern, especially with changes like actually allowing you to move while aiming and some of the control. I have struggled a bit with some of the new controls, but that's muscle memory. So that's me wanting to press different buttons because I remember what they do.
Yeah.
But I think it's fine. Like I feel like we have a bit of an obsession as a society with bloody retreading the same paths over and over again. I see this as a way to tart up a great game in a modern engine, get it running on modern hardware, get it looking nicer, and as a way, really, as a backdoor, I assume, to sort of relaunching the franchise more generally, and I'm fine with that. And also, this game does a lot. So, let's talk about voice, right? People are upset because Frank West's voice actor has been replaced. I get it. However, as soon as you start playing the game, you realise why, which is the original Dead Rising has about 50% of its dialogue is voiced, and about 50% of its dialogue is not. All the dialogue that's in gameplay, so every time you go up to a survivor and talk to them, is all just text boxes in the original game. Because it was a game made in 2006, it was the first 360 generation game Capcom made, I think. I don't remember if Lost Planet was first or this, but it was one of the first anyway.
Yeah.
And in the PS2 era, that was how you did games. Even Final Fantasy had, some stuff voiced and some stuff not. In this, they've revoiced everything. And they've voiced everything, crucially. So all those survivor interactions are voiced. If you remember the original Dead Rising, whenever Otis calls you on the walkie-talkie, in the original game, you would press a button to answer that, and it would bring up subtitles. And if you were in the middle of a boss fight or a melee of zombies when he called, as would often be the case because he'd always seem to call at the most inconvenient times, you would miss what he was saying, and there was no way to repeat it. And the objective that he told you about, there's some survivors over in Paradise Plaza, whatever, you wouldn't know about, and you'd miss things. In this, you press to answer, there are subtitles, but Otis actually speaks to you. Or it recontextualizes some of the quests. So there's a quest where you rescue some Japanese tourists quite early in the game. And in the original game, you get notified about them by Otis, and then you go to them and you talk to them, and it's all text boxes. In this game, when you're approaching them, you hear them talking in Japanese to each other before you approach them. And then the way you solve this quest is you have to find a book that's a Japanese phrase book. And in the original game, once you do that, it sort of represents Frank attempting to speak Japanese to them in really broken Japanese from a phrase book. In this, Frank actually speaks his best broken-ass Japanese in voice acting to them, and then you hear them talking back and forth, and it's obviously subtitles telling you what they're saying. And I love that. I think it's brilliant. And then on top of that, they've taken this, and I don't know if it's porting a bit of code over from, because it's all RE engine, right? So maybe they've borrowed some code, but then they've also given survivors this Dragon's Dogma porn-like behavior. So now when you're wandering around the mall, they will say stuff like, the gun shop's just over there if we need some weapons. Or they will say, hey, there's something up there you should take a photo of, Frank, to point out the PP stickers. PP stickers were a nightmare in Dead Rising 1 because they obviously gave you a great deal of experience points, which are really valuable. And I think there was like 110 of them or somewhere just over 100 of them. But there was no indication of where they were on the map or anything like that. And only a very tiny indication in the game world. And even if you had a guide, if you forgot which ones you'd already photographed, it just became a nightmare. But this, now you've got, as you're walking around with survivors in tow, they might notice stuff that you don't notice. And as well as pointing it out with a nice little bit of voiceover that doesn't stop the gameplay, doesn't interrupt stuff, just like in Dragon's Dogma, it's just a voice line and a subtitle on the side of the screen as you walk around. But also, it gets marked on the map. And these are the things that really streamline the experience, I think, for a more modern audience. They also make the survivors feel more alive and feel more real. They've obviously made some improvements to the AI and stuff like that. You can now do stuff like once a survivor's in your party, when you check your watch, it tells you what sorts of weapons they prefer. Now, I don't know if in the code of the original game, survivors even did have preferred weapons. There were certain people that wouldn't take certain sorts of weapons. So there were survivors in the original version that maybe they don't feel safe to use a gun. So if you try to give them a gun, they won't accept it, but they will accept a hammer or a sword or something. But in this game, survivors actually straight up have preferred weapons where they're more proficient with them. And you can tell what they are by opening up the menu when they're following you, and then you can get that weapon, give it them, and it's all this stuff it feels like it's a lot of small mechanical iterations on what the original Dead Rising did well, but it really, really adds up to something, I think. It adds up to make it feel like a much more modern game, and it's that stuff where I think this does feel more like a remake than a remaster. It is the same game under the hood. It is identical in many ways under the hood. But the amount of stuff that's been added, and admittedly, there's a few things that have been taken out too. There's a bit of what I would call what is going to be called censorship, and certain boring virgins on the internet are going to be really upset about. One mechanic has been changed specifically, I think, to just address sexism. A bunch of outfits have been changed. The mechanic that's changed means a quest has had to change as well, and I'm sure that stuff is going to kick up a lot of fuss. But ultimately, I think, on balance, anything they've taken out, anything lost, so some of that stuff that's been changed, in the name of censorship or in the name of, I would argue, being more inclusive or whatever. And also other losses like the loss of Frank's original voice actor, stuff like that. I want to say the new guy's charismatic as well. I think all that stuff is worth it for all the new stuff they add. And what I was most impressed by going into this is I think Capcom has done a tremendously bad job at getting across that they've actually added quite a lot of stuff. I think they've done a tremendously bad job at just going like all that stuff I just said about the survivors. They have said jack shit about that.
Yeah.
And it's mad to me because if I was in marketing there, I would be screaming from the rooftops that we'd added a bit of the porn-style AI from Dragon's Dogma into the game. Because one of the big complaints in the first game was how dumb and annoying the AI was and how the survivors would struggle to pathfind. And they've said, oh, we've done AI improvements. And yeah, the pathfinding's better. And they've replaced some, like quite famously, they've replaced the ledge that leads to the safe room with just steps, because loads of the AI always used to get stuck on that ledge and you wouldn't be able to get them into the safe room until you got them to successfully climb it. But it's all those little things, the voice acting, police firing guns, more models for zombies, all that stuff. It really, really adds up to, I think, just make this feel like a new experience.
And just finally, because we'll get you on the main pod when we can talk about it kind of more in the round. Do you think this is the kind of thing that can spark enough re-interest to... Personally, I don't think they would do a 5 because I think most people forgot they did a 4, but would this spark enough re-interest where Capcom would put the money behind a full new game?
I think they will. I think they probably already are, to be honest, if I had to guess. I think you almost don't do that don't do this unless that is your intention. I do think the smart move is to do 2 in the same style as this. 2 is beloved. 2 also shared an engine and shared a lot of technology with 1. So a lot of the work to do 2 is basically done by doing this game. If I were them, I would do this. I would do 2, and I would include off the record in 2 as well. So include both stories and include Case Zero and Case West, the Xbox Live Arcade one. Case Zero is a really weird one because that's still it's one of the lost games now. The Xbox store is shut because it was never available anywhere else. Do 2, include all that stuff, and then move on. And maybe you just pretend that 3 and 4 didn't happen, and you pick up the series from 2. And you certainly get that vibe. It's like the costumes they've got for Frank West in this game. They got a Chuck costume. They don't have a Nick costume.
Yeah.
So I think that is an admission of the way Capcom probably sees it. And actually, I think it makes sense because Dead Rising 2 was very much a Capcom game, whereas 3 and 4 were really Xbox Game Studios games that happened to be developed by Capcom in a way. Like a lot of the changes to those games were, I understand, driven by Xbox executives and Xbox producers, as opposed to Capcom's people. So yeah, I saw. I actually have on my computer quite a bit of footage of the cancelled Dead Rising 5, and it did not look good. It was like set in South America, and it had a Day of the Dead theme, which was quite a cool idea. But it's I don't know. Some of the stuff I saw was quite racially insensitive, actually, in that sense.
I'm shocked. As soon as you said that setting, I was like, oh great, this will go very, very well.
The only thing that I was quite pleased that you were going to be playing as Chuck again, but yeah. So I saw some footage of that, and it's like you never want to see studios close. Obviously, it was awful though when Capcom Vancouver, previously White Castle Games, closed. But I do think, in terms of the path for Dead Rising, they'd lost their way by the time they got to 4. I don't think that was on the developers necessarily. Like I say, I think they were in a weird situation where they were a Capcom studio making an Xbox exclusive with Xbox publishers demanding certain things about the way the game should be. But I really, really do think this is the path to. And you look at this game and you can see all that stuff I've described that they've done, which is wonderful. You can see how a new one can sort of take it forward in the sense that, so the mall is still heavily segmented, right? You've got load screens between all the areas and all that sort of stuff. and you can see how you look at this, and then you look at Dragon's Dogma, and you think about Dead Rising 1 and Dragon's Dogma 1, and then Dragon's Dogma 2. I can see where the next Dead Rising ends up,
Yeah.
based on that trajectory. And I just think, I hope this sells, but I think it's still going to be an acquired taste. Some people are going to feel like Frank's slow, and some people are going to be confused by the timing element and
As
the way
soon as the
it's
first
so easy to-
survivor dies that person has never met, they'll be like, what is going on here? Like, how is I supposed to
Yeah.
know? That kind of thing. Whereas obviously, if you've been playing it, you can, like, the first time that happened and I recognized the name, I was like, oh yeah, they're over here, that kind of thing. So yeah,
But also, for better or for worse, and this might help Dead Rising actually, we live in a different age now where like in 2006, game guides existed and game facts existed and all that sort of stuff, but the guide culture wasn't as developed as it is
Yeah.
now. And so I think an interesting element on that front is that we live in a world now where I think more people. Well, in 2006, not everybody even had a smartphone that they could go to Google and search and find the answer for. Oh, Pamela Tompkins has died. Why?
Yeah.
In the year of our Lord 2024, the answers to those questions are closer to people's fingertips than ever, and I think that will help people to understand mechanically what Dead Rising is doing much quicker. And so, in that sense, I actually think this game could be much more successful because of that. And actually, we've sort of just seen that with Dragon's Dogma, where again, the obtuse elements of Dragon's Dogma have gone over much better the second time around. It's found a much broader audience the second time around, because as well as the mechanics nerds who fall in love with it because of its mechanical depth and dig into it and learn about it on their own, you also have people who fell in love with it because they played it, got confused, Googled, did some reading and went, oh. And so I think, I hope that will be what happens for DR.
Me too. Okay, you can see our full impressions in a little while. Are you reviewing this one? Where will it be?
Yeah, I will review it on VG247.com.
One of your plethora
whenever
of
the review embargo drops.
Who can say?
I don't know if they've even told us, but
it
shows how much attention
haven't. Okay, you can find Alex.
Last thing.
Last thing.
People want to know this. I did get it running on Steam Deck, and it runs all right.
Nice.
I had to play around with the settings a little bit, like what it defaulted to when I booted it on deck. Crashed hard locked the deck twice.
Nice.
And then I went in and tweaked a bit and got it down. And I felt like it looked pretty good, looked significantly better than the original game, solid frame rate, all that sort of stuff. So it's totally going to be, and also this is a non-final version where they've told us that a performance patch is coming. As part of that, there'll probably be deck verification and a proper deck settings profile, so you don't have to do all the tweaking I did. But the headline is, it works on deck.
Nice. I was playing it on a 4090 and it looked quite nice. I know that was short.
I have also done that, but it's not, it's not.
It's so funny. You turn everything up to full and it's like it's using fucking 5% of your graphics card. Or good stuff.
Yeah, it's not a game that you need a 4090 for, but it does look nice on a 40.
It's got a 240 hertz mode though.
And obviously it's an RE Engine game, so it supports all any technology that has been, so FSR, DLSS on NVIDIA cards, all that stuff is supported, which means even on weaker cards, you'll probably be able to get this looking pretty nice.
Yeah. Okay, you can follow Alex on X at APZoneRunner. I'm at Jordan Medler. Be sure to check out patreon.com/videogameschronicle and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, say goodbye, Alex.
See ya.
And we'll see you later. We've covered wars,